Hello! So, let's talk about deontological versus consequentialist ethics. That's a bit of a heavy intro, but hear me out. So, early on in this section, Vin tests out her knowledge about the Khandra, or rather her suspicions about the Khandra, on Orosur. Or, well, I suppose by the end of this section it turns out that wasn't actually Orosur, it was Tensoon, but she tested out on the person she thinks of as Orosur. Um, and it clearly hurts him, and she apologizes. She says she didn't mean it, and he says, it doesn't matter what you meant. Um, just don't do it again. This is, in a very simple way, what we call consequentialist ethics, i.e., an action is bad regardless of your intention, regardless of any circumstances, simply because it had a bad consequence. You hurt someone, that's the only thing that matters. And then in the immediate next chapter, we get Elend talking with Tindwyl and Sazed about his decision to tell the truth to the assembly, thereby condemning himself to being deposed, and probably condemning a bunch of people of Luthadel to death and slavery. That's something to keep in mind here. Elend's loss is really, really bad for everyone. So, where does this... Elend then talks to Sazed and Tindwyl about this. And Tindwyl, again, espouses consequentialist ethics. She again talks about how, this was pretty stupid, because now the city is doomed. And then Sazed says that, no, Elend did the right thing, because regardless of the consequences, he acted based on essentially moral first principles. He believes that lying is wrong, and so he did not lie. And damn the consequences. This is what we call deontological ethics, or Kantian ethics, because Kant is the most famous one for espousing it, but in more general terms, it's deontological. Deontological means that there are actions which are fundamentally wrong and actions which are fundamentally right, and nothing else matters. If it's wrong to lie, then it is equally wrong to lie in order to hurt someone or to lie in order to save someone's life. Both are just wrong because they're lying. So we have these two very opposite ethical frameworks, and the thing is, the vast, vast, vast majority of people do not subscribe to one of these exclusively over the other, because that's not how people work, and because doing so would be weird. Subscribing entirely to one or the other would immediately lead to weird situations. So, for example, if you subscribe entirely to deontological ethics, then telling a small white lie in order to literally save someone's life becomes a horrible sin. And if you subscribe entirely to consequentialist ethics, then there is no difference ethically between someone who tripped down the stairs and fell on another person and broke their leg, and someone who took a hammer to that other person and aggressively shattered their leg on purpose. And both of these are obviously completely untenable positions to hold in the real world in a society. So generally speaking, ethics is less about picking between extremes, and more about sort of finding the right balance between them. And I gotta say, personally, while I certainly include elements of deontology in my ethical framework, I do lean more towards the consequentialist side. So I found Sazed's arguments in this chapter incredibly unconvincing and kind of infuriating. Um, I feel like Ellen's position here is a profoundly selfish one. In order to not feel like he did something wrong, in order to not betray his own vaunted morals, he is essentially willing to sacrifice everyone else. He's willing to leave the city to be slaughtered by the Koloss and by Strath. And that sucks. Now, what's interesting about this is that Sazed begins this section of the book by telling Elend that not lying in this situation, despite the terrible consequences, was the right thing to do because of deontological ethics. And then Sazed ends this section by lying to Vin and Elend in a pretty major way because he thinks it will lead to good consequences. This, I think, is very much on purpose. I would be very surprised if Sanderson did this on accident because it's such an obvious parallel. So I am curious to see what the message of this story ends up being in regards to ethics. Because right now, it feels like it might be a story about the limits of deontological ethics, like the ways in which it might not be sufficient to cover various extreme situations, which I find very interesting. So I'm not going to talk about that anymore right now because it's still developing. But I will talk about it when the book is over, depending on how it ends. I just wanted to sort of put that idea out there. Now, that was a heavy philosophical opening. Let's go with some lighter stuff from this section. Love triangles are stupid. I don't think I've ever really enjoyed a love triangle. So I'm glad that this one is over. Again, full spoilers for the book, of course. Book up to the point in the title. So Zane's dead, and he revealed himself as a horrible person to Vin at the end, right before his death. And I'm very happy about this. While I found Zane himself to be a fascinating character, and I'm very sad that we won't get to see more of him, because I feel like there was potential there that's now been wasted. I am glad that the Vin love triangle storyline is over, because it was incredibly stupid. Not necessarily poorly written, but just annoying to read about, because it's all just misunderstanding upon misunderstanding, lack of communication upon lack of communication, and it all makes sense. It's all in character, but it's still very frustrating to read. So yeah, I'm happy that Vin and Elend are like officially together now. They got married, which I've talked before about the weird implication that they're not having sex yet because they're not married, which I still find weird. Um, like apparently, Ellen has not seen Vin's boobs until now, and they've been dating for like over a year. Which, okay, sure, Brandon, why not? Uh, sure. Uh, but what I want to talk about is actually not that when it comes to their marriage. What I want to talk about is the insistence on emphasizing that they can't get divorced. Like Sazed is like, oh, I married you using this specific tradition which forbids divorce. It's like, why was that necessary? Would the would the climax of Vin and Ellen's love story be any less compelling or emotionally intense if they had just gotten regular married with like the option to get divorced? Why this, Brandon? I don't know. Just whenever Sanderson gets into the ethical debate around marriage and sex, things get very weird for me. Like kind of uncomfortable. But that's fine, because that's not what these stories are about. The romances are always a relatively minor aspect of the Sanderson stories so far. So I'm willing to put up with that. Um, what else have I got to say about this? Right, Zane's death is also very odd because it leaves way too many loose ends. Shortly before his death, we discovered that he is a semi-inquisitor, but like in reverse. Like instead of having a spike hammered into his spine, he has one hammered into his chest, I think. And it's not clear what the spike does, and it's also uh, only one spike. Like he doesn't have the ones through the eyes and everywhere else. So I guess he's like I said, he's like a semi-inquisitor or something. That might mean that he's not actually dead, maybe, but his death scene felt very, very final. Like especially the part from his perspective where he was talking to God. We do get confirmation that God is real, that something is actually talking to Zane. I don't know what that could be. I had a theory for a while that Zane was actually the hero of ages, and that he was receiving visions from God as part of that. I don't. That's probably not the case anymore since he is dead now. So I don't know. I'm wondering, will Vin start hearing from God as she gets closer to the Well of Ascension? I presume so, because otherwise it would be weird to introduce this whole element of Zane hearing from some weird supernatural entity without then expanding on that, since he's dead now. This final scene with Zane also involves the reveal of Tensoon, which is something that really took me by surprise. I did not see that one coming. I really was not expecting that. So I guess I was about to say we never met Orisur. That's not true. We met Orisur in the first book, and here in the second book, in the first couple of chapters before Vin gets him the dog body. Those were all the real Orisur. But the quote-unquote Orisur that Vin actually has been developing a relationship with over the course of this book has never actually been Orisur. It's been Tensoon the whole time. And his contract has been with Zane. So I'm really curious about where Tensoon's character is going forward, because he seems to be going back to the Khandra to get reassigned, I suppose. Hopefully he gets reassigned to Vin. That would be nice. I mean, ideally, he wouldn't get reassigned to anyone and he'd just be a free person and not a freaking slave. But that's apparently the Kandra don't want that. Um, Whatever. But in general, the whole Kandra thing is getting very, very interesting, and it feels odd to me. I'm not sure where it's going because we haven't really encountered many Kandra so far. These are really the only two. I think one was like briefly mentioned in the first book as belonging to the Ventures. Um, Belonging. See, I'm accepting the fucked up language here. But yeah, we don't really have any evidence that the Kandra are going to play a major role in the story, except for the fact that Vin keeps learning more information about them, which implies that she's going to need that information at some point. So, my guess would be that all the Kandra stuff will probably come to a head in the third book, just because this book is relatively close to being over, and there's not a lot of time left to wrap up a lot of things, and I don't feel like the Kandra stuff is like part of the main plot of this book. And I also just generally don't know where this book is going at this point, actually, because they're technically going to the Well of Ascension, but it's a lie. Sazed just made up the location, so they're going to a random place that doesn't have anything in it. So I'm curious how that's gonna go. The title of the book makes you think they're going to find the well in this book, which might happen, but it might also not. It's possible that the book will end on like a very low, depressing note where they like realize that there's no well and just like fall into despair. Which would be interesting and also makes sense as like the climax of the second act of the story. That's usually how second act climaxes work. It's usually a low point. So yeah, I'm not gonna predict where the end of this book is going. I am, however, going to make a prediction about the deepness. My prediction is the deepness is not the mists. The mists are what the Kandra call preservation, and the deepness is what the Kandra call ruin. And the deepness actually already happened, and it came. And it's the volcanoes, the ash mounds, the lava, the ash choking the sky, blotting out the sun and making all the plant life die, and covering the world with ash. That is the apocalypse that Alendi was trying to prevent, and that is the apocalypse which then just happened because Rashek took the well instead and didn't stop it. So that's my theory right now. My theory right now is that there is no that the deepness isn't actually the literal end of the world as people were afraid of, and that it just happened. There's like it's not a question of, oh, what was this disaster that was averted? It's a question of, oh, it's a thing that already happened. The deepness won. It's over. Like 1,000 years ago. Now we're living in a post-deepness world. That's my theory, and my other theory is that the mists are a counter to the deepness, obviously, and that the Well of Ascension presumably allows one to control the mists, but that they come with a severe cost of their own, and that's what Quan was afraid of. I think that Quan maybe realized the nature of the deepness and the nature of the counter to the deepness. And the reason he wanted to stop Alendi is because he believed that whatever the Well of Ascension does to counter the deepness might be worse than the deepness. This is a completely wild theory that's probably wrong, but it is the one that I'm sort of like working through in my mind and that I will be thinking about going forward as I read the rest of the book. Speaking of the rest of the book, I will probably not make 2 videos, even though I have 2 parts of the book remaining. Simply because I will be on a cross-Atlantic flight in a couple of days, and I will probably read the entire rest of the book on that flight. So I will make 1 video about the 2 final parts of the book once I land back home. So for Christmas. So I guess I'll see you in a while, and the next video in this series that you see will be in a very, very different backdrop to what you're seeing right now. So look forward to that. Okay, I'm gonna go probably finish this book then. Bye. Hey, I realized after a few hours after recording that I completely forgot to talk about the actual like big thing that happened in this section, which is Vin and Zane going on their insane rampage through Set's forces, and Vin single-handedly, personally killing hundreds of people. That was a lot. I don't know how I forgot to talk about that. I got so distracted talking about philosophy and the deepness and stuff like that I completely forgot the actual big thing that happened here. So, Vin kills like 300 people. And it is horrifying, it is gruesome. I really enjoyed the chapter. It was incredibly well written, and it is also an exploration of something that I've been wondering about for a while now, which is that the Mistborn in general, especially Vane, but Kelsier and Vin have also expressed similar feelings sometimes, they have a bit of a superiority complex. They, in general, do not value the lives of non-Mistborn as much as they value Mistborn lives. That is simply a fact. And it seems to stem from the powers themselves, like from the fact of having powers, because Vin is not the sort of person who would naturally hold that position. But she just sort of slips into it, and not just under Zane's influence. Like, even in the last book, when she was grounded for a while after being injured, and she couldn't go out into the night and do her Mistborn thing, she just spontaneously had these thoughts about, like, you know, I can't live like a normal person. I have a right to the mists. The mists are my birthright. She has this feeling of entitlement, essentially, because she's Mistborn. Which is, you know, this is sort of an extreme expression of it, killing hundreds of people, but just because you can, I guess, just to prove a point. But it is interesting, and I wonder how that's going to develop going forward. I wonder if we're going to see sort of... I wonder if this was the end of Vin's sort of anti-hero, maybe even villain arc, where she sort of, like, flirts with the potential of, like, darkness. Or if that's going to come back, and she's still going to struggle with these impulses to view herself as better than everyone else, as the arbiter of right and wrong, as a judge, jury, and executioner. So I am curious where that's going, but I'm also curious about the... I feel lack of recognition of the 300 deaths. Like they talk about it, it's acknowledged, but when people talk about it, it's mostly like, oh, she killed 300 people. That's very politically bad for us because now Set's leaving. Yeah, but she also murdered 300 human beings. Like, that's a serious cause for concern? I wouldn't marry her, Ellen. That's like she's incredibly dangerous and clearly deeply unstable. Why did you marry her? Like, I hope that the book is going forward, acknowledge what a huge, huge deal, morally speaking, it is that Vin just killed 300 people who were, like, not in self defense. Like, she came after them and killed them. Jesus Christ! Or Lord Ruler, as the case may be. I hope that's dealt with more going forward. Um, yeah, I just wanted to jump in and add this to the video because I like I said, I don't know how, but I completely forgot to talk about it in the actual video. Bye.